The Outer Wilds is a notable game for many reasons, but one of the design elements that I find to be most intriguing is that every player starts, and more importantly ends, every playthrough of the game with the same core abilities as every other player. A complete novice at the game will have pretty much the same abilities and options as a veteran speedrunner throughout their whole playthrough. Other games have speedrunning tech so obscure that there's no chance any casual player would ever stumble across it. Take Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, for instance. In a glitchless run of the game, it's not too different from a casual run at a basic level. However, in its unrestricted category, Sekiro speedrunners literally fly through the game, using tricks that no casual player would ever even think is possible. So why am I bringing this up in a video about Peggle speedrunning? Well, because when it comes to Peggle speedrunning, it somewhat paradoxically has similarities with both of these games. Anyone who sets out to be the best at speedrunning Peggle sets out with the same tools as everyone else. Yet the amount of tech and innovation that such a simple game has might surprise you. The biggest question when it comes to how far you can go with it is how much effort you're willing to put in. This is the story of how far Peggle speedrunners have come in the most competitive category in the game, Peggle Deluxe Any %. If you've never seen Peggle speedruns before, the concept can seem somewhat contradictory at first. At its core, Peggle is a game with a lot of RNG, being different every time you play. Yet at the same time, its physics are deterministic, and so much of it can be boiled down to a science. In terms of any % times, the recent world records are insanely optimized, as we'll soon see. Yet at the same time, the very best top runners are still many minutes off the human sum of best. So why is this the case? Well, to understand, let's start at the very beginning, and go through a bit of history before we discuss the mechanics more in depth. Although Peggle released in 2007, it didn't really have a strong speedrunning scene right away. The first few runs submitted to the speedrun.com leaderboard were completed in 2013, and even these weren't submitted until 2015, with no video to go with most of these early times, so we don't really have much to go over when it comes to these runs. To put these times into perspective, they were right around the 2-hour mark, which is really only a bit faster than most people can manage to get on their first playthrough nowadays. As an example, recently I hosted a competition, and Mitriz, a Souls game speedrunner, speedran Peggle for the first time without having any prior experience of the game, and he got just over 2 hours. So a 2-hour time is not super impressive. In 2014 and 2015, two players, Redemption99 and I Have No Name 248, traded the record back and forth a bit, with the record eventually landing in the 120 range. With all that setting the stage, the first run we'll take a deeper look at would be submitted around this time as well. With the game having a bit more activity in August 2015, it attracted the attention of the player who would be the game's first back-to-back record holder, Dowolf. Dowolf quickly took the world record, with his first time clocking in at 1:13:29. This run had 5 level losses, so even Dowolf knew it could be improved, and within a few weeks he would improve the record to a 1:10:16. And about a month after that, in October 2015, he would improve it again to a 1:07:58. Let's focus on this last run, as it has the best video quality out of the set. We'll start here by talking about the very basics of Peggle before moving on to slightly more advanced discussion and covering the run in particular. If you already know how Peggle works, feel free to use the timestamp on screen to skip past the basic stuff. Peggle at its core is a fairly simple game. You simply point and shoot a ball, trying to hit the orange pegs as the ball drops down through the level. To win a level, you just need to clear all the oranges, which are also worth more points than blue pegs. You start with 10 balls and you lose if you run out. However, you can earn balls back by either having the ball drop in the bucket at the end of its shot, or by hitting enough pegs to get enough points to fill up the bar on the left, earning up to 3 balls max per shot that way. There's even a multiplier that increases with the more orange pegs that you've cleared, making it more viable to earn back balls at the end of the level when there's less pegs left on the screen. That's essentially it as far as the core gameplay loop, and although it is simple, the gameplay can be very satisfying at both a casual and speedrunning level. We'll get into more advanced strategies soon, but the only other things to note are that starting on level 3 of the game, 2 green pegs will begin to appear on each level, granting special powers related to each Peggle master. And beginning on level 4, a purple peg will appear in a random spot on every shot, which gives a large boost in points and can be crucial in earning back free balls. Peggle Deluxe has 55 levels, split into sets of 5, each with a different master, except for the last 5 called the master levels, which allow you to pick any master from the game. To beat an any percent or adventure mode run, you just need to get through all 55 levels on a new save file. So now getting to the run. As Dowolf began his 3rd world record run, we see that most levels ended up being no problem. Even this early on in the game's speedrunning history, losses on levels are not that common, especially in the early game. There are some exceptions to this, such as the level 2-5, but as a whole the game doesn't start to ramp up in difficulty until the end of the game. My comparison of Peggle to Outer Wilds at the start of the video, while maybe a bit of a stretch, was based off of one key aspect of Peggle speedrunning. In the end, Peggle's core gameplay never changes. You simply play the way you normally would, but more efficiently, using the knowledge you acquire over sometimes hundreds of attempts and hundreds of hours of the grind. There are some more advanced techniques and strategies that we'll discuss in a bit, but in general, if you want to get better at Peggle speedrunning, the best thing to do is just improve at the core gameplay loop. And getting back to the run again, one of the biggest ways to save time is just to not lose levels. And that seems really obvious, but getting to the point where you can do all 55 levels in the game without failing any is a task that takes a lot more practice than you might think. And unfortunately for Dowolf, he did suffer a bit in the middle of this run, losing once on Renfield the Pumpkin's 3rd level, and again on the 4th level of that set. The rest of the run went fairly smoothly though. Again, we won't focus too much on every stage or level, but I will point out that on the master levels, Dowolf mainly used a mix of Tula the Sunflower, whose ability clears a portion of all remaining oranges, and Cinderbottom, whose fireball sweeps a path through the map, clearing anything in the way. Cinderbottom is especially useful on the final level, where he can easily pierce through one of the most intimidating level layouts in the game. We'll see that in future runs this strategy will remain fairly popular, and although there's some variation, the most popular masters for the master levels are Tula, Cinderbottom, and occasionally a bit of Splork or Who. The crazy thing is that even with his losses in the mid-game, Dowolf still made up time over his previous record. A large part of why this run saved time, even with an extra loss, comes down to more abstract aspects of speedrunning Peggle. Some of these strategies are simple, such as shooting at angles where the ball doesn't bounce up as much, or aiming the final shot to directly land in one of the buckets during Fever. Other strategies are much more complex. And that's not to say that Dowolf is a bad Peggle player. Even with a mostly casual playstyle, Dowolf had a lot of great shots and clutch moments. Take for instance his play at the end of 10-5, known by its level name of Zenfrog. This level is infamous and is one of, if not the single hardest level in the game. Dowolf came down to having only 3 balls left with more oranges than that, all of which were moving. But with a combination of luck and skill, he made it through. Dowolf's runs were great for when they were performed, and it's pretty telling that even though literally hundreds of runners have tried their hand at the game in the 8 years since his run, Dowolf's 107.58 still puts him in the top 40 runners on the leaderboard. After Dowolf's streak of records, the runs died down for a bit. In fact, it wouldn't be until almost 2 years later that a new player, Koro, would take the stage. Koro began running in August of 2017, and that same month, he would actually take the top spot. At this point, Koro didn't really have any different tech than Dowolf. He just played quickly. And once again, we see how even having losses doesn't always matter if you play fast to make up for it. Koro's 106.54 had 3 losses, yet it still saved a minute over Dowolf's time. Other than just playing faster, there's really not much else to say about Koro. After this run, things died down again for a while. Until about 2 years later, a new runner entered the scene. And this runner's name was Pnaha.
Oops. Holy crap! What a run!
Pnaha, who I would nominate as one of Finland's top gamers, is a name that you'll be hearing a lot more of for the rest of this video. And he began his runs of Peggle Deluxe back in 2019, although he had taken the world record for Peggle's sequel game, Peggle Knights, the year prior. Peggle Knights, while not having as competitive of a scene as Deluxe, features many levels that are even harder than Deluxe, and Pnaha was well prepared as a result. As he began to run the game, he brought his time lower and lower. He started with a submission of 1 hour 14 minutes, and then brought it down to a 1:10. and then a 108. And on August 19th, 2019, Pnaha would get a time of 104.54. This time crushed Koro's previous world record of 106.54, and it was not actually the world record, because literally the same day, hours before Pnaha performed this run, Koro had actually submitted a PB of 104.49. Yep, that's right. Pnaha, who nowadays is considered one of the all-time greats of Peggle speedrunning, was barely cut off by 5 seconds the day that he did his run back in 2019. And the crazy part is that after this crazy coincidence, which Pnaha has actually described as his most memorable disappointment of his entire Peggle career, he was so discouraged that it would actually be a whole year until he returned to the game. In fact, nothing else would change at the top for this whole year. And it's quite crazy to think about what things might look like now if Pnaha had actually decided to stick with it back in 2019. But regardless, the things to come in 2020 and beyond would change the face of Peggle speedrunning forever. So let's skip ahead. It's 2020 and Pnaha finally returned. Koro was nowhere to be seen, and Dowolf had moved on to other games, and no one else was even sub 110. Pnaha dives back in, and he spends a few days practicing and grinding. However, something is different this time. For the first time, we start to see strats. When I say strats for Peggle, that encompasses a lot of different strategies. Some crazy complex, some fairly simple. But it all started with the most basic and replicable strat of them all. Simply shooting with a full right or full left shot. Peggle is deterministic, and while some levels will very rarely play out the same way, especially if they have moving pegs, there are actually plenty of levels and situations where doing the same shot will result in the same outcome every time. And one of the easiest ways to do this is by simply aiming as far to the left or right as the game will let you, normalizing the angle to be the same every time. A perfect example of this is the level 3-2, where a full right shot will 100% of the time lead to a shot making it into the right side of the bottom slide. Pnaha had begun experimenting around this time, and realized that certain levels had good shots like this that were consistent, leading to easier starts for these levels. This level of consistency made it less likely to fail certain levels, and again, up until this point, every world record had had level fails. To put it into perspective, the game has 55 levels, and runs at this point were around the 1 hour 5 minute mark, meaning that each level took a little bit over a minute on average. If you fail a level later into an attempt at it, you might have to do that whole level all over, losing around that much time. The biggest time save that 95% of Peggle runs ever have is just not losing. And here, Pnaha still did have a couple of losses, one of which did come on the final level of the game. It was rough, and it seemed iffy on whether or not he'd actually clinched the record. He began the final level again. He had done it. On the 8th of October 2020, Pnaha had finally claimed the throne. And from here, things take a turn. Whereas before there had been a few records from a few different people, spread apart by a few years between bursts of activity, Pnaha was here to stay. With previous record holders retired from Peggle speedrunning, Pnaha had only one person to race against: himself. And race against himself he would. A week later, he improved his time to a 102.33. In this run, he lost some time in the early and mid-game, but he roared back in for a new record at the end of the run. 2 weeks later, another new record, this time with a 1:01:30, with no fails too. And the crazy part is that he knew he still had time to save, because his endgame splits lost time against his previous run. After the 1:01:30, Pnaha actually took a bit of a break, not from running Peggle, but just from any percent. Over the next 10 months, he went on to run New Game Plus, as well as some of the individual master runs that became a thing around this time. And even though he wasn't running any percent, Pnaha was improving not only his general skills, but also his strats. And by the time he returned to any percent later in 2021, he had more to bring to the table. Beyond the right side and left side shots I mentioned before, around this time he started innovating a new type of shot, nowadays called tap shots or tap strats. The concept of this is fairly simple. Beyond using the mouse to shoot, you can do fine-tuned adjustments to the cursor by tapping the left and right arrow keys. These adjustments do the same amount of angle change every time. Thus, in combination with something that standardizes the shooting angle, you can get a lot more perfectly replicable shots. A perfect example of this is on the level 5-1, where a right shot with one tap back to the left results in always getting the top slide. There's tons more levels that he had found great tap and edge shots on, but there's also one other major strategy that was born during this time of innovation. And this strategy is called pixel shots, and you might be able to guess what it is by the name. Pixel shots are shots that are aimed at a specific pixel on the level. They're much harder to line up than tap strats, but they will have the same outcome every time, and the benefit they provide is that you can find pixels to use for reference anywhere in the level, as opposed to the edge and tap strats, which are limited to being near the top ends of the screen. A great example of an early pixel shot is the one that Pnaha found for 2-4. We can see that he starts by doing a tap shot first to get a consistent setup for the level, setting up the large spiral in the middle. Then, by aiming at a very specific pixel in the bottom of the screen, he's able to line up the spiral to be hit in one epic slide. Beyond looking cool, this saves a lot of time and leads to a lot more consistent clears, as do many of the great tap strats. These strats allowed Pnaha's return to any percent to be a massive success. On the 26th of August 2021, Pnaha brought his record down to a time of 1 hour and only 25 seconds. The sub-hour was within reach. And still, no one was even close to him. The top 5 hadn't even changed. But around this time, the course of Peggle speedrunning history would be irreversibly altered, in a way far greater than anyone could have predicted. And the cause was the entrance of the YouTuber DougDoug into the Peggle scene.
Okay, it's fine. Check this out. See?
Around July of 2021, the awesome and balding YouTuber DougDoug began to play Peggle on stream, including speedrunning it. These runs weren't too serious at first, although he feuded with some of his viewers over the highly prestigious Claude % world record in both Peggle Deluxe and Nights, playing the game every so often on his stream. But even though Peggle wasn't even close to being the main game that he was streaming during this time, this sense of competition soon drove others to join the fray. I, for one, started speedrunning Peggle because of Doug, and many other Pegglers can point to his runs in 2021 and 2022 as being their inspirations for trying their hand at it too. And the leaderboards began to fill up. Before Doug, the any percent leaderboard had about 100 people or so. 6 months later, there'd be almost 150. A year later, there'd be over 300. We're getting a bit ahead of ourselves there, but it's important to realize just how much of an impact the Peggle speedrun community would feel from DougDoug and his viewers. And with these new runners, would this mean that maybe, finally, Pnaha would have some competition? Well, not quite. Again, I have to emphasize just how dominant Pnaha was during this time. It seemed like rather than bringing competition to challenge Pnaha, it actually just made him stronger. With more new runners struggling to find consistency, many of them started hunting for strats on their own. Pnaha had by this point made a publicly available guide for his strats, and soon others would add to it or make their own strat documents entirely. A big shout out deserves to be given to Phoenix Bros, who, even though he doesn't run the game much anymore, was a very early innovator who came up with a lot of his own notations and advanced strategies for some of the harder levels in the game. Later on, other runners would document their strategies, and some of the more prolific strat hunters include Satan herself, Brassmeat, Narcolepsy, and many others. Even I came up with a couple innovations, most of which have been innovated upon even further. The relevance of this all right now is that Pnaha was only getting stronger from this too. And on the 31st of August 2021, he would show this yet again. He started off with a pretty bad start actually. He was almost a minute behind after the second split. However, he slowly started clawing his way back to a good pace. After the halfway point, he was almost a minute ahead of his PB, on pace for sub-hour. And right after this, he got a gold split on Tula, and was now on an insane pace. He continued to gain time until finally he reached the end of Master Who's levels. He only needed to get through Zenfrog, one of the most infamously difficult levels in the game, to make it to the final 5 levels. An absolutely heartbreaking time loss. If you watch my first Peggle history video, I talk a bit there about how brutal this level is, but you can see from how it played out here that sometimes it just screws you out of a perfect run. Even so, Pnaha was still ahead of his pace. He beat the level on his second try and continued on. The master levels proved to actually be no challenge, and in the end, Pnaha would get a new world record again. And this time, the record was 58 minutes and 34 seconds. Not only had he gotten the sub-hour, even with a heartbreaking loss, he had absolutely crushed the hour barrier. Out of all of Peggle's barriers to be broken, this was the biggest. And of course, the fact that it had a loss meant that it could be brought even lower. At the beginning of this video, I talked about how you might be surprised by just how much Peggle has been destroyed by its speedrunners. Already we've seen how Pnaha, even with major time loss, crushed all other records. You might think that Pnaha was near the limit of what a perfect run would look like. Well, it's at this point that I'd love to bring up a quote that's always stuck with me from one of the top players of a very different speed game, Trackmania. Although Trackmania is a very different game than Peggle, there's a great quote from the Trackmania player Karyan. "You can never reach the limit because when you approach it, you only push it further away." And if you think that we're even close to where Peggle's speedrun limit would end up, well, let's just say that we've got a lot left to cover. Let's skip ahead a few months from Pnaha's sub-hour time to June 2022. After Doug's initial boost in the game's speedrunning scene, we would finally see some newer names in the top 10. Lovable Man had finally toppled Koro for second place, and Crackle was close behind as well. And a few other people had also entered the top 10. So the question is, in these few months that it took for the top 10 to change, where was Pnaha at? He had broken the sub-hour already, but where was he now? Had he managed to break sub 58? Well, after his sub-hour he had taken a break, but in May of 2022 he had beaten his record. Not just once, not just twice, but 3 separate times. The first was a time of 57 minutes flat. The next was 56:51. And both of these even had losses, but Pnaha was just too fast for it to matter. And again, we're not really covering all of these runs in depth, but that's just because Pnaha set so many records that they would quickly become obsolete. In his final run of this set of 3, he even improved on his 56:51 again, and this time also not failing a single level. Even on the hardest levels of the late game, he made it through without much issue. And his efforts rewarded him with a new world record of 55:37. Simply put, Pnaha was miles ahead of anyone else. He was 9 minutes ahead of second place, and it seemed unlikely that anyone else could rise to his level. But in July of 2022, things would take a bit of a turn. The first thing to happen would be the appearance of a completely new top-tier player of the game, AnyGeorge. AnyGeorge seemed to come out of nowhere. His first submitted run was an any % run of Peggle Knights, Peggle's sequel game, and in that he had taken 3rd place with his very first run, being only the 3rd person ever to get sub 110 in that game. And later that month he came roaring into Peggle Deluxe. He took 2nd place. With what time, you might ask? Well, with a 57:37. Not only was he the 2nd player to get a sub hour, he wasn't too far off of Pnaha's time. His PB even had a fail on 2-5, so he had time to save on a clean run. This was certainly unexpected, and Pnaha actually had someone to somewhat contend with at this point. The other major change that would rock the community around this time was the release of heat maps. A community member going by the name of Smiling Marks had been working for a bit on a data-driven approach to find new strategies for the game. He essentially created a simulation that tried to find the average best shots for any given level, and he produced images showing the result in the form of heat maps. Here's an example for what he found for the level 3-5. While the community already had a method of getting the slide at the bottom of the level using the side shot plus tap method, that method required 2 separate shots, and it was a bit time consuming. Using the new heat maps, we could find new consistent shots by following the shots that the simulation had taken. Right away, people found this shot here. By lining up the cursor at one of the few pixels in this area, this would be the result. Compare that now to the old strategy in terms of how quickly they worked to get the bottom slide. This strat has since been replaced by an even better shot, but the new one as well was found using the heat maps. And with this, the full era of the pixel shots was upon the Peggle community, as runners began flocking to find new shots. Some of these shots were lenient, while others required pixel-perfect aim to get the perfectly consistent and tubular shots that were needed. Let's get back to the run history. With the new pixel shots, Pnaha was stronger than ever. Although he didn't run any % for a few more months, he would return in October 2022. This time, he had incorporated various new pixel shots. This run started out alright, with nothing too crazy in the first few splits, but towards the midpoint of the run, he started to build a major lead. There's actually a great example of an extremely useful pixel shot on 6-1 that absolutely destroys the whole level.
This new pixel start. Let's see if that works. Please. Oh yes. And almost a third. That's correct.
And beyond many of these specific strategies, Pnaha had also just gotten better. In fact, even with a loss on 9-4, he remained ahead. And he would end this run with a new record of 54 minutes and 20 seconds.
Alright. We actually got the world record. Nice.
This gave him a bit more of a lead over AnyGeorge, although George hadn't pushed any further since his other run. But let's take a look at 3rd at this point. Was it still in the 104 range? Not at all. Britshaw had broken through the hour barrier. And behind him? Well, I had been in a race to beat Britshaw to the sub-hour, and although he had won, I was right behind him, and Crackle was there too. Even after that, the number of runners in the 104 and 105 range was crazy. Runners were starting to catch up. About a month later, Pnaha starts up another run, and almost like clockwork, of course it's a new record. This time he cut out the fail from the last run and had even more pixel shots than ever.
Let's go sub 45. I mean 54. Fuck. Our numbers. Hops. Holy crap!
Pnaha, please concentrate.
His run ended up being a 52:29. where was the limit for Pnaha? More than that though, where were the others now? Well, Helios, who had long been a pretty good player, had now joined the race for sub-hour, and Brassbeat wasn't too far behind either. And just like he had done in the past, Pnaha actually took a break at this point, still miles ahead of the competition. But that doesn't mean everyone else rested too. You see, the story of Peggle Deluxe Any Percent so far has mainly seemed like a journey about Pnaha crushing the record over and over again. And while, yeah, that's pretty much true, it's also a story of the community getting better together as a whole. And here's where I can offer some personal perspective. The grind for sub-hour when I took it on was often demoralizing. When Britshaw and I had gotten close, I knew it was possible for myself, but it still took me a long time to get it together and make it through after Britshaw beat me to it. Even when I finally did get it in late 2022, I was very happy to be the 4th player to get it, but I also felt like I had gotten a little bit lucky.
No! Oh, come on! No! I hit the button like a split second earlier. Let's go! Let's go! Oh, let's go! Oh.
Even still, with each new person to get sub-hour, it proved that you didn't have to be the god of Peggle to get there. It just took steady improvement. Let's skip ahead another 6 months. Pnaha still hadn't come back to improve his record. But let's take a look at where everyone else was at. How many people now had a sub-hour time? Was it just 4 or 5 people? No. How about the entire top 10? That's right. In about 6 months, the leaderboard went from having 3 people with sub-hour times to the entire top 10, breaking this barrier, with others right there on the line too. There was a cluster of players around the 56-minute mark, and although this was still minutes off of Pnaha's time, things were starting to heat up. In fact, over the next few months in mid-2023, multiple players began to really set themselves on the goal of catching up. In May, Pnaha would bring his time down a little bit to 51:29, but only a couple months after this, things were quite a bit different again near the top of the leaderboards. Behind Pnaha's 51:29 was a stunning 52:08. Who had done it? Was it Britshaw, who had been steadily improving? Was it Brassbeat, Helios, or George? No, it was a completely new runner, Polypies. Polypies, like George before him, pretty much came out of nowhere, and within a month or 2 of running the game had crushed most of the competition. Helios, Britshaw, and Brassbeat had all gotten below 55 minutes as well, but Polypies was truly in a position to challenge Pnaha. And around this time, a battle began. Polypies even had taken the New Game Plus record from Pnaha, and although Pnaha took it back soon after, it was clear that Pnaha was no longer alone at the top. Speaking of Pnaha, I haven't really covered his runs around here too in depth, and part of this was because this whole era of Peggle speedrunning was defined by 2 mad scrambles. First was for the rest of the community to catch up to him, and the other was a goal that he set for himself, to break the 50-minute barrier. That's right, it took almost 15 years of peggling for runners to break through the hour barrier, and now within 2 years of that happening, the 50-minute barrier was looming close. In August, Pnaha began his grind in earnest. He first got a PB of a few seconds with a 51:25. 2 days later, he had a great pace. As he entered the master levels, he had the potential to do it. 11:1 went well, and so did 11:2 and 11:3. All he had to do was clutch out the last 2 levels and...
Well, not sub 50. Oh, I didn't count the pixels.
It just wasn't meant to be. Even with a loss on 11:4, it was a new world record. And once again, he knew he could do it. The crazy thing is, there was no massive new strategies. Pnaha was just that good. There were a couple of minor new strategies that I will point out here, just because I think they're kind of neat and it shows how much runners have now analyzed this game. The first is something very strange. At the start of each level, there's actually a dialogue box that pops up from each character that you're playing as. Around the time that a lot of new strategies and tech were being found, Brassbeat discovered that you can skip this dialog box if you click both left and right click when exiting the previous level. This is a funny little trick, but it actually does save potentially many seconds over the course of a run, as you have to menu a lot less. A different strategy was the corner fireball strat. This was discovered in the second half of 2023, and while it only affects the levels where Lord Cinderbottom can be used, it's still pretty cool. Basically, by timing the fireball shots on the side of the level and firing when the bucket is at the opposite edge of the screen, you can actually have the fireball bounce around a huge portion of the screen, absolutely demolishing many levels, and very quickly too. We can even see this already starting to be utilized by Pnaha in his runs, where he uses Cinderbottom on the master levels to really tear through them. And the last strat is one that is actually so niche and recent that, to my knowledge, it hasn't been in a world record run yet. When going through a level normally, by holding the enter key constantly, which is another way of firing the ball, when the previous shot is finished, the next shot will fire on the first possible frame. If you're able to line up shots while the previous shot is happening, this means you can save a bit of time. Maybe just portions of a second here and there on each shot, but it adds up when you're taking hundreds of shots per run. It also leads to a funny situation where if you use this strat on the first level of the game, it ends up sounding like this. Luckily, other levels don't have this problem. I could fill a whole video just talking about the tech and the innovations of Peggle speedruns, but I think you get the idea. So as for Pnaha, what about his runs? Well, he kept grinding. And as with many things, it ended up being just a matter of time and effort. On the 12th of September 2023, Pnaha would end up starting a very fateful run. He did this run offline and was fully focused on the task ahead. He had a great early game, even getting a gold on the third stage and getting a full minute ahead. The run went back and forth from there. He lost a bit of time on stages 8 and 9, but he entered Zenfrog with a good pace. And he ended up moving on to the master levels with a gold split on stage 10 overall.
Nice. Okay, master levels, please. I mean, me, please. I hate when people say, like, thank you game, or give me good pace, or fuck you game for fucking output shot. It's always about you, not the game.
In the master levels, he used a combination of pixel shots and fireballs to absolutely demolish the first level. Fireballs helped on the second as well. The third level went fairly normally with no major problems. And now he was on to 11-4, the level that had killed his previous run's chance at the sub 50. This time, it went smoothly. He had a few tough shots, but in the end, he made it to the Helix. And on the last level, after a quick reset, he used Cinder's fireballs to absolutely smash the Helix.
I have to get a better fireball. Yes. 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 Woo. Yes. Let's go. That's crazy. Whew. 48. Any percent done.
48. Not only had he smashed the 50-minute barrier, he got a sub 49-minute time. It's worth reflecting back again on how far this run has come. Back when Dowolf got his 3 records in a row, he only had a couple fails, making it clear that a low hour time was possible. Then, when Pnaha entered the scene, sub-hours soon became a reality. But with each new age of Peggle speedrunning, each of these barriers have soon become obsolete. Just like with any speedrunning endeavor, once you reach the limit, you only push it further away. The crazy thing is, though, with Peggle speedrunning, the limit may not even ever be truly approachable. Brassbeat has an awesome document where he keeps track of the human sum of best, and the current human sum of best done in any percent runs is actually 36 minutes, roughly. And realistically, an actual perfect run with perfect generation and perfect play would be in probably the 20-minute range. Of course, that's not actually humanly possible, but the point is that Peggle speedruns can pretty much always be optimized further. And now that Pnaha got the sub 50, he decided his journey to optimize his own play was done. At least for now. But that's not where our story ends. Because again, this isn't just a story of Pnaha's dominance, but also of how the community grew enough to actually challenge him. Let's take another look at the top 3. Polypies and Helios were both a couple of minutes behind, but they were both grinding. What about a month later? Helios had jumped up a couple minutes and taken second place from Polypies. Helios has long been a great runner of Peggle, but what really sets him apart is that he is absolutely great at lining up hard pixel shots quickly and consistently. At this level of play, all the top players are great at getting through the game quickly, with 6 shots on every run. But when it comes down to getting some of the more advanced strategies consistently, Helios is one of the best. And this run for him came together super well. There was even an insanely clutch Zen Frog.
Come on, come on, come on, come on. Hit anything! Oh my god, dude! What the No! Come on! Please, 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 please. You're not gonna do this to me right now.
After taking second place, it seemed like sub 50 might be in the cards for him as well. Another month passes by, and at the start of November, the top 3 looks like this. Polypies had reclaimed second, and he was mere seconds from breaching sub 50. Polypies' style of running can be described with 2 words: full send. If you ever have a chance to watch Polypies play, he never slows down for pretty much anything, and will oftentimes take much riskier approaches to finishing levels. This ends up being very quick when it works out, but can often lead to a lot of resets and failed runs. Even so, Polypies was willing to put in the grind, and he had the skill. Something would have to give. Who would it be to break the 50-minute barrier next? Well, we wouldn't have to wait too long. On the 22nd of November, Polypies would do it, with a run clocking in at 49:41. And 3 days later, Helios would get a time of 49:46.
Yes! Oh my god! Oh my god!
The top 3 were all sub 50. And the reason I'm not focusing too much on the specifics of these runs is because soon this top 3 would be obsolete once again. Both Helios and Polypies were not satisfied with just sub 50. The record was within their reach. And so, on the 27th of November 2023, one of these 2 runners would begin a fateful run. They would tear through the first half of the game with no issue, doing most of the early splits in well under 5 minutes, and with having a Bjorn split that was barely over 3. They lost a bit of time in some of the later splits, but they were hanging in there. And they finally got to Zenfrog. Things were looking a bit dicey. But they did it. On to the final levels of the game. They exited Zenfrog with the 43:19 on the clock. All they had to do to get the record was beat the last 5 levels in around 5 minutes. And even under the stress of being on such good pace, they lined up their shots, hitting some of the most advanced shots in the game and getting perfect fireballs. 11-3 did what it often does, not cooperating very well towards the end, but even that was no problem. 11.4 went by at an average pace, and the runner entered the final level at just past the 47-minute mark. He got the first fireball, and did not get the fireball he wanted, having to actually reset the level. What would happen? Well, let's watch and see. It was a new record of 48 minutes flat, and the runner was PolyPies. Finland's champion speedrunner had finally fallen to one of the game's newest top speedrunners. And that is where the video was supposed to end. I would mention how Helios was still running the category today, and how we didn't know if Pnaha would ever return to claim his top spot. But it turns out that when you take 6 months to make a video that probably should have only taken 2, things will end up changing. About 6 months ago, another new top runner entered the scene named JNano. And crazily enough, just like PolyPies, JNano pretty much immediately brought his time down into the 50-minute range. In fact, his first submitted run of any percent was a 58.31, which is pretty crazy for your first run to be that. And within just a couple months of starting running, he began going live on stream with world record attempts. That would seem crazy for almost anyone else, but JNano is insanely good at the game. And beyond bringing skill to the grind, one thing that set JNano apart is that he used a very mathematically driven approach to plan out his level strategies. He would focus his efforts on finding the fastest and most efficient pixel shots possible. And in some cases he would even break it down to pegs per second values to compare different strats. And this approach led to quick results. JNano quickly brought down his time to 53 minutes, and then after focusing on New Game Plus for a while, he came back to any percent and quickly saw even more success. After an unrecorded 49-minute time, it was clear he was a serious contender. And even though that run was unrecorded, at the start of August, JNano would post a PB of 48.59, making him one of only 3 people to ever get a sub 49 time. And when you watch JNano's runs, it's pretty mesmerizing, honestly, to see how much he's broken down the game and how meticulously planned out so many levels are. As an example, his strats on 2-4 went even further than a lot of older strats. We had already known of ways to get parts of the big spiral, but JNano's new strats completely shred the level, and he's pretty much able to do them 100% of the time, barring any multi-ball shenanigans from Jimmy's power. It seemed like only a matter of time until he would break through, and maybe you could have guessed by the whole framing of this part, but of course he did break through. In fact, you've been watching the world record run right now. What's crazy is that this run was not a perfect run. There was time loss in Bjorn, Splork, and Renfield, and JNano has even said that he had to slow down and purposely use some safer strats. But through all that, he kept a good lead, and he made it to the master levels on world record pace. For a great example to show just how crazy strats and just runner skill levels are nowadays, we can take a good look at 11-2. JNano has so many strats that hit so many of the slides on the level that the level's basically over before it begins. And in the case of this run, JNano didn't even need to take the second fireball shot because, well, it was just completely unnecessary. This display of dominance continues on through 11.3 and 11.4, and finally onto the final level, where, after a quick reset, JNano rushed forwards for victory. 47:53. It was record by 7 seconds, and it broke a new minute barrier in the process. Even if just a few bounces had gone differently, it may have actually missed the record instead. And that is where the record now stands as of September of 2024. It's possible that Polypies or Pnaha might try to reclaim the top spot, or maybe Helios will finally break through with his own grind, but that remains to be seen. But we do know that there's time to save. I asked JNano what he thinks the limit is, and he says that a 46-minute time is very achievable, but even he points out that if better strats are found, the time could go as low as 45 minutes or even beyond that. But in the end, after having seen the limit be broken again and again, by Dowolf, by Koro, by Pnaha, Pnaha again, Pnaha even more times, then by Polypies and now JNano, all of this just proves one thing. You can never reach the limit, because when you approach it, you only push it further away. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I would love if you could leave a like and subscribe. I've done a lot more Peggle videos, and you can check those out on my channel if you want to see more stuff like this. Have a good day.